It was a happy birthday for little Alex Smith just about 2 months ago. His first birthday that he celebrated with his older brother, Michael. Now, almost like they fell off the end of the earth, they have disappeared.
In late October 1994, late at night, a frantic woman rushed into a family's home in a small South Carolina town, desperately begging for help. She had been carjacked and her 2 young sons were taken.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much, and your daddy, these whole families love you so much.
If anybody sees anything whatsoever, please contact your local police department, please.
As soon as the media caught wind of the story, the entire nation joined in the search for the missing boys.
Searchers, including the head of the state law enforcement division, have been focusing their efforts along Highway 49. But there have been reports the car was seen this afternoon west of here in Greenville County.
Teams of police officers and volunteers searched every corner of the town, and even the FBI got involved. But it was all in vain. The boys seemed to have vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind.
This is the hardest type of abduction case to work because we have not developed a definite suspect in this case as of yet. Right now, we do not have anything but an incident location.
The mystery of that night became one of the most notorious criminal cases of the decade. When the truth was finally revealed, it sent shockwaves around the world, an ending that no one saw coming. On the evening of October 25th, 1994, Union County Police in South Carolina received a call from a local resident whose peaceful evening had been shattered by a distraught woman, hysterically banging on the door, begging for help to find her children.
Union County 911 operators received a frantic call reporting the kidnapping of 2 small boys.
County communication.
Yes, ma'am. There's a lady that come up that door, and some guy jumped into a red light with her car with her 2 kids in it.
That evening, Susan Smith had been on her way to visit a friend with her sons, Michael and Alex, safely buckled in their car seats in the back. Shaken and terrified, she recounted how a man had jumped into her car at a red light, threatened her with a gun, and demanded she keeps driving.
And he took off, and she got out of the car here at our house.
And he's got the kid?
Yes, ma'am, in her car. She's real hysterical.
A little later, the attacker pushed Susan out of the car, telling her to get out of there. When she pleaded to take her children with her, he coldly replied, "I don't have time for that." Panicked, Susan ran to the nearest house to call for help. Seeing how shaken and terrified she was, the homeowner himself dialed 911 and explained what had happened.
They were crying for their mama, and, it was terrible to know that I couldn't get back there and get them,
David Smith, Susan's ex-husband and the boy's father, found out about the incident while at work. He received a call that gave him little information, only that Michael and Alex were missing. Without hesitation, David rushed to Susan's side and found her in utter despair, sobbing uncontrollably. He could barely make out what she was saying. It was only when he spoke to the police at the scene that he was able to get more details.
23-year-old Susan Smith was driving to a friend's house about 9 last night when she stopped at this intersection. And suddenly a man appeared in her car. In the back seat, Smith's 2 boys, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alexander.
The family was immediately swarmed by representatives from various media outlets, all eager for details and requesting interviews. The young parents cooperated, knowing that widespread coverage could be crucial.
It was at this traffic light at Monarch Mills that Susan says the man jumped in her car.
I was stopped at a red light, and just out of nowhere, this black guy came up and just opened the door and jumped in the car, and he had a gun, and he had it pointed in my side and told me to drive, and so I did. And when I tried to ask him why he was doing this or whatever, he just told me to shut up or he'd kill me. So I just kept driving. My babies were in the back seat and they were crying. Michael's 3, and he's very smart. He knew something was wrong.
According to Susan, the carjacker had ordered her to drive around John D. Long Lake, and once they reached the destination, he forced her out of the car.
And he told me to get out, and I said, well, can I get my children? And he said, no. He said, I don't have time for that. And they were just crying.
And he drove off, completely ignoring the boys' cries, a detail that truly baffled the police. A nationwide search for the vehicle was immediately launched, with Sheriff Howard Wells escalating the case beyond Union County and South Carolina, involving the FBI as well.
This is a 1990 Mazda Protege. The license plate is a South Carolina registration GBK 167. He didn't ask for money, he didn't harm her, and he said he would not harm the children. We hope he's as good as his word.
If anybody sees anything that looks unusual, please contact somebody, because I am just so heartsick over it. I miss them so much.
Meanwhile, Susan and David Smith were doing everything they could to find their sons.
It's just a tragedy. I just can't believe them going through it, and I just hope and pray for their safe return to me.
We would like to believe that he is not going to hurt these children.
As Susan explained, the man who hijacked the car showed no interest in her, didn't attempt to take her purse, but still drove off with 2 crying boys in the back seat. Something about this just didn't quite make sense.
If anybody sees anything whatsoever, please contact your local police department, please.
All I'm doing is just praying and just keeping my faith that they're going to be okay.
The very next day after the incident, the state police sent a team of investigators and a forensic artist to Union to create a composite sketch of the man who committed the crime.
Based on Miss Smith's description, the suspect is a black male in his 20s or 30s wearing a plaid shirt, blue jeans, and a blue toboggan-style hat. He was last seen in the Smith car, a 1990 maroon Mazda Protege.
Law enforcement officers and volunteers combed the woods near the reported abduction site.
We're about 150 feet, I think, where she was put out.
The first priority was to search the nearby woods and the area around where the carjacker had pushed Susan out of the car. They hoped the man might have realized that stealing the vehicle had turned into a much more serious crime and could have left the children somewhere soon after abandoning their mother.
They're looking for anything that can give them a clue to what happened. Shoes, clothes.
Police helicopters hovered over the area for hours, searching for Michael and Alex, while the Department of Natural Resources sent in a team of divers. They put in every possible effort, as locals referred to John D. Long Lake as the Black Bottom. Anything submerged just 6 inches below the surface became completely undetectable.
It's just muddy water. It's slick bottom. That's about it. There's nothing else down there. No rocks, a few beer cans. That's about it.
From time to time, the police also received calls claiming that the boys had been spotted in various locations, and every lead was thoroughly investigated.
Searchers, including the head of the state law enforcement division, have been focusing their efforts along Highway 49. But there have been reports the car was seen this afternoon west of here in Greenville County.
As expected, detectives turned to their existing databases, knowing that in any area, there could be someone with a prior record or arrest for similar crimes. This approach often helps catch criminals within hours.
We've run criminal histories on suspects or people who are on parole or probation within the area. So far, we haven't developed a solid suspect there. My heart goes out to the family in this case, but I can't get those children off of my mind because they're so young. The investigation into the abductor is secondary to the welfare of those children.
They were screaming, hollering, crying, and I'm just scared that he just lost his patience or something, you know. I don't know. They've got people everywhere looking for him. I mean, you know, you can hear the helicopters are there, and but they haven't seen anything. It's crazy.
I don't know. We just tried everything that we can ever try.
The longer the search for the boys continued, the more anxiety grew. The hope that the perpetrator had simply dropped the children off somewhere was fading with each passing day. Although David and Susan Smith were nearing the final stages of their divorce when their sons disappeared, they reunited during the search. They chose to stay at David's parents' house, believing it was best to be together and readily available to the authorities at all times.
At the boys' home, meantime, an officer remains on the scene, presumably to receive a hoped-for phone call from the suspect. The boys' toys wait, unused, in the driveway.
Both parents loved their children deeply, but that wasn't enough to save their marriage. After the separation, David often said that while he and Susan made a terrible couple, they were exceptional parents.
I plead to the guy To the man, me and my wife plead to him to please return our children to us safely and unharmed. We love our children very much, and we want them returned to us safe and sound.
Day after day, new tips came in, keeping alive the hope that Michael and Alex would be found safe and that they would be able to hold them once more.
The reported sighting of a man roughly matching the description of the suspect in a wooded area 10 miles from the reported abduction didn't pan out despite an intensive search.
Our 911 center had received a call from a subject stating that these two young boys from down in South Carolina may be in the area here where we're located now.
Every lead was meticulously followed, with Sheriff Howard Wells frequently sending officers out of state to chase down fresh clues. But it was all for nothing. The children and the elusive carjacker seemed to have vanished into thin air. Nevertheless, Sheriff Wells held twice daily press briefings to keep the media and public informed.
There's been no breakthrough since the last time I talked with you. This is the hardest type of abduction case to work because we have not developed a definite suspect in this case as of yet. Right now, we do not have anything but an incident location.
How long can the search go on? Until the boys are found. That's what the sheriff says. But he knows that as the days turn into a week and longer, without any promising developments, the intensity of the search will fade.
As the entire nation anxiously awaited any updates about Michael and Alex Smith, the tireless search had stretched far beyond the initial search area. After 3 days, there was still no trace of the suspect or the vehicle. People who initially believed the boys or the car would soon be found abandoned began to wonder what had truly happened to the children.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much, and your daddy, this whole family's love you so much. I just feel in my heart that you're okay.
The eyes of the world are on this case.
It's turned this place upside down. I mean, Union's never seen anything like this.
Sheriff Wells' ongoing optimism and his actions left many puzzled. If the perpetrator had no intention for the boys, why hadn't they been found yet?
We do not have a car. We do not have the children. We do not have the suspect. We have telephone tips, reports matching descriptions. We have information coming in from friends, from relatives, from psychics, from general crackpots. But we've got to go through all of it.
A command center at the Sheriff's Department in Union, South Carolina is taking calls on the case around the clock from all around the country. In town, posters of the children adorn the storefronts. Yellow ribbons call for their return.
We've had another day of aerial search, water search, a horseback patrol to try to develop leads in this case.
Searchers don't know what happened. All they know is somewhere there has to be evidence of the missing boys and the car.
Do you think it's possible that the children are still alive and with this man being driven around?
Not only is it possible, that's my hope right now. If he's still driving around, that gives us more opportunity to find the vehicle and the children.
In high-profile cases like this, support often comes from those who have faced similar tragedies themselves.
I called the Polygraphs Foundation, see if there was anything I could do. I just want the kids back.
Polygraphs was abducted at knife point from her bedroom the night of October 1st, as she and two girlfriends overnighted at her house.
Mark Klaas, who had founded an organization to help grieving parents, had spent years aiding families in their most painful times. He answered the Smith family's call for help and flew to Union County. But surprisingly, Susan and David refused to meet with him, and Susan's cousin stepped in as the family's spokesperson to the press.
I have a statement here written by Susan and David, and I want to read this to you. It is so hard to explain how much we love those two little boys and how much we miss them. The hardest part is not knowing where they are.
Why are you speaking instead of the parents?
David and Susan have been through a tragedy that is unimaginable to most of us. And it has just been extremely difficult for them to be able to gather the emotional strength they need to face this.
Klaas was stunned. From his own heartbreaking experience, he knew that parents were usually the best advocates for their missing children. Yet, for some reason, the Smiths chose to retreat from the public. Why? Klaas's confusion was completely understandable. In such desperate situations, parents typically do whatever is necessary, no matter how exhausted they are. The Smiths' decision to cut themselves off from a nation that was praying for their children immediately raised suspicions. Susan claimed that a black man had forced his way into her car while she was stopped at a red light. He supposedly made her drive along Highway 49 toward the lake, then pushed her out of the car, leaving the boys in the back seat.
What makes it unusual is the fact that most kidnappings don't occur as a result of a carjacking.
Most carjackers who would take a car not realizing there are children in the back seats will immediately abandon that car.
He in no way touched her, molested her in any way at all. While they were driving, her purse was in the floorboard next to his feet. He asked for no money. He did not go through her purse.
As the search continued day after day, public sentiment towards Susan Smith shifted to one of growing skepticism. Klaas, however, was determined not to give up. He had come to Union to advocate for Michael and Alex, so he began interviewing various people in the community. Eventually, he spoke to the neighbor across the street from the Smiths. While Susan had informed the police that she left home around 8:30 that evening, this neighbor had a different account. Oh no, she left much earlier, probably around 6 or 6:30, she said, recalling that she had seen the young mother leaving with her 2 children. Additionally, Susan had changed her story several times regarding what she was doing that night. At first, she had mentioned she was going to visit a friend.
He lives in Monarch, and it wasn't far from where the red light was. I only had maybe a mile to go, or it's even that long, but I didn't make it.
They located the friend and questioned him, and he confirmed that he wasn't expecting any visitors that evening. He wasn't even at home.
She had never gotten to the friend's house. We questioned the friend and found out he wasn't at home.
In light of this, Susan altered her story, stating she had been at Walmart. The police followed up with the store, but none of the employees remembered seeing her with her children that night. What concerned the investigators the most was the intersection where Susan claimed the carjacking took place. The situation she described simply couldn't have happened at that specific location. On Highway 49, the traffic light was configured so that vehicles traveling east to west, which was the direction Smith was headed, always had a green light. A red light would only be visible if another vehicle was crossing the intersection. This caught the detectives' attention, as it meant that at least one vehicle must have crossed the intersection, implying there should have been a witness. However, Susan maintained that there were no witnesses.
Law enforcement authorities say they have no good, credible leads yet. They are looking at all possibilities, including the possibility that the mother might not be telling the truth.
I haven't ruled out anyone as a suspect.
Law enforcement officials arranged to meet with Susan and David again for additional questioning and verification. They first interviewed the father of the missing boys and conducted a polygraph test with a seasoned specialist from the FBI. David was cleared as a potential suspect that very day, but Susan's interviews, along with those of the detectives and the polygraph examiner, had to be repeated several times.
We've had questions about her story. That's why we've talked to her more than one time.
Susan Smith took multiple polygraph tests and, without a doubt, failed 3 of them.
It was a happy birthday for little Alex Smith just about 2 months ago. His first birthday that he celebrated with his older brother Michael. Now, almost like they fell off the end of the earth, they have disappeared. Their mother Susan reported last Tuesday night that they had been carjacked by a stranger. But local newspaper reports now indicate that she was given a polygraph test and results proved inconclusive.
The police could have straightforwardly informed the public that Susan had lied repeatedly while answering the detectives' questions and was clearly concealing something. However, Sheriff Howard Wells was cautious to do so. He was carefully navigating the situation and worried about spooking his most intriguing suspect.
After 6 days of seclusion, David and Susan Smith appeared at the county courthouse in Union to again plead for the return of their children.
David Smith was fiercely committed to recovering his children at any cost, insisting that engaging with the press was vital, stressing that the media depended on them more than they depended on the media. As their hopes started to fade, Sheriff Wells recognized that his strategy was leading him closer to the true culprit, and that was the person he needed to concentrate on above all else at that moment.
Throughout the past 9 days, law enforcement authorities around the country followed up on thousands of tips. Police have been conducting a parallel investigation, looking for a stranger abductor, but also keeping a very close eye on family members, since most child abductions happen by somebody who is a relative.
We are going to look at everything and rule out nothing. The truth is going to come out.
The police, detectives, FBI agents, and even the experts who had been involved in the investigation from the start recognized that Susan Smith's account was filled with significant gaps and, alarmingly, suspicious inaccuracies.
For more than a week, a desperate search for two little boys has riveted a nation. From the parents came impassioned pleas, their hopes raised, then dashed when leads failed to pan out. Tonight, a shocking development.
Sheriff Howard Wells announced he would be holding a press conference.
We're going to make a brief announcement. Susan Smith has been arrested and will be charged with 2 counts of murder in connection with the deaths of her children, Michael 3 and Alexander 14 months.
David Smith found out about the situation from the television and felt as if he were caught in a cruel joke. He had faith in his ex-wife and thought of her as a loving mother. He couldn't imagine for a moment that Susan could do anything horrific to their children.
I believed her 100%. Okay, not 99, not 95. I believe Susan 100%.
The initial alarm was raised by the medical examiner who had spoken with Susan on Wednesday, October 26th. After their discussion, he informed the sheriff, "From what I can tell, she is involved in this case."
And that's when the decision was made that we would run a parallel investigation.
The police had done an impressive job, carefully examining every detail of Susan's story and closely monitoring her actions. The turning point came on Wednesday, November 2nd, when the polygraph examiner posed the question, "Is it possible that the carjacking took place somewhere other than where you've described?" He calmly explained how the traffic light functioned at that location and suggested that the incident might have happened at a different spot. Experienced investigators often use a strategy known as giving a suspect another rope to hang themselves. Susan seized on what she believed was a chance to shift blame and altered her account, saying the incident happened in a rural area 13 miles from where she initially claimed. The detectives quickly countered this by letting her know that the new location was closely monitored due to an operation targeting illegal substances. This exchange didn't go on for long. Susan soon cracked under the pressure.
For 9 days, hundreds of volunteers joined federal, state, and local investigators in a coast-to-coast search for the boys and for a suspect who never was.
Sheriff Wells, the polygraph examiner, and their team took Susan aside for another interview. They had a strategy in mind.
I told her that we had already discredited her story and that I would tell the world that it was not true.
Some of the sheriff's statements were just a bluff. He knew she was lying, but he needed her to confess because the police had no clue about what really happened or where the children were. Wells's double game was aimed at carefully unraveling her fabrications, leading her to the point where she would feel obligated to confess.
She asked if I would pray with her at that time, and I did. And at the end of the prayer, she was crying, and she just told me that she was so ashamed. And she said, "You don't understand. My children are not all right."
Eventually, Susan revealed the truth to them. The car was in Lake John D. Long, and the children were inside, submerged beneath the water.
The vehicle, a 1990 Mazda, driven by Smith, was located late Thursday afternoon in Lake John D. Long near Union. 2 bodies were found in the vehicle's back seat.
She signed a confession saying she strapped the boys into their car seats and let the vehicle roll into a lake.
The police dispatched drivers to the lake. Although they had previously searched the area, they hadn't found anything due to the murky water hiding the car. When the vehicle was finally pulled from the water, the children were indeed inside.
The Smith family held a visitation at the Holcomb Funeral Home in Union. Scores of local residents filed in to pay their respects. A funeral for the 2 young boys is scheduled for Sunday.
When news of Susan's confession broke, the local community was completely caught off guard. She had made numerous appearances on television and had genuinely touched the hearts of people all over the country.
It hurts so bad to see those poor little boys out there playing, and us believing she was a good mother.
People in Union were horrified to learn that the children were alive when the car went into the water.
Everyone was left with the same question. Why? What could lead a mother to commit such an act against her own children?
Something snapped in her and something went wrong, because the Susan I knew would not have done it.
The motive of this crime was suicide, not anything else.
David Brooke, Susan Smith's lawyer, showed her confession to a few reporters, despite the fact that publishing it was prohibited. He aimed to shift public opinion about his client.
The confession paints the picture of a distraught, desperate woman. In it, Susan Smith says she drove to John D. Long Lake, considering killing herself. Her father committed suicide when she was a child. She allegedly tried to kill herself twice. And court documents allege her stepfather molested her.
On that fateful day, Susan drove to Lake John D. Long, fully intending to end her life and taking her sons with her to prevent them from having to live without their mother. The lake featured a boat ramp where Susan started to drive down but paused halfway. After a brief moment, she moved a little further and stopped again. At that point, she got out of the car and released the handbrake, which caused the vehicle to roll into the water with Michael and Alex still inside. The defense contended that this was an unsuccessful suicide attempt rather than a coldly calculated crime, while the prosecution, led by attorney Tommy Pope, argued that her motives for the crime was related to a relationship with a younger man who found the children to be an obstacle.
Prosecutors will argue that she's a heartless killer who disposed of her children in order to snare a rich boyfriend.
Smith worked at a company in Union called Conso, where she fell for the owner's son, Tom Findley. A well-known bachelor, designer, and artist, Findley became the main focus for the divorced mother. About 10 days before the boys went missing, he broke things off with Susan, writing her a letter that carefully explained their relationship could have been more serious, and he might have fallen in love with her if it weren't for her children. Tom acknowledged that Michael and Alex were great kids, but made it clear that he simply didn't want to be a father. At that moment, Findley likely had no idea of the dark path Susan was being pushed towards. Prosecutor Pope found it fairly easy to validate his theory. That night, when Susan drove the car with the boys into the lake, she was wearing a dark red hoodie, a gift from Findley, and her trunk was packed with odd items, including her wedding albums and maternity clothes. It was evident that Smith was trying to bury her old life.
When Susan Smith was remorseful, why is she remorseful? Is she remorseful because of Michael and Alex? Or is she remorseful because now everything she had laid out, everything she had done, had fallen apart?
Supermarket tabloids have called her the most hated mom in America. 23-year-old Susan Smith is charged with drowning her sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex.
The frustration of the public, law enforcement, and everyone involved in the search for the children intensified in the months leading up to the trial.
Smith dreads the trial, not because of the possible outcome, her attorney says, but because she'll have to once again be in the same room with the boy's father.
I'd like once again to emphasize to the public that you remember the two little boys who lost their life and who are the real victims through all of this.
On the day the trial began, a crowd of people and reporters gathered outside the courthouse, all eager to hear Susan's defense. However, she chose not to testify, realizing she could never adequately explain how her wish to end her life resulted in the tragic deaths of Michael and Alex, along with everything associated with her sons, her marriage, and more. There was no doubt that Susan would be found guilty. The key question in the trial was whether she would live after what she had done.
Come on in, we do have a verdict.
The courtroom was hushed. Susan Smith was awaiting word of her fate. The jury walked in and handed its verdict to the court clerk. She read in a soft voice, "Indictment for murder. The verdict, guilty of murder."
She expected this. I expected this. It's just hard to hear.
Next week, the same jury will meet to hear testimony and consider her sentence. She could get life in prison with a chance of parole after 30 years, or death in the electric chair.
Public sentiment was split on what kind of punishment Susan Smith should receive.
Take her in there and just throw her in there, like,
death penalty's too good for her.
I don't think it's right that she done something like that. And she shouldn't go free for doing it, but I don't think they should take her life for doing it because it's not going to bring her kids back.
Tommy Pope invited David Smith to share his thoughts during the final hearing, and he agreed.
Susan Smith's ex-husband, David Smith, arrived here at court earlier today, and he is openly supporting the prosecution's effort to seek the death penalty.
As the heartbroken father spoke, tears filled the courtroom. This man's life had fallen apart.
It was the most difficult thing I've had to do, I guess, since I buried Michael and Alex.
Even Susan was affected by his words. As she left the courtroom after the verdict was announced, she whispered to him, "I'm sorry." Tommy Pope also initiated an experiment with a car. They found a similar vehicle and set up cameras in the back seats to capture the events from Michael and Alex's perspective as the car sank into the water. The footage revealed how the water rose, eventually reaching the boys' seats. It took 6 minutes for the water to reach the cameras. Susan Smith had those 6 minutes to save her sons, but instead, she spent that time fabricating a story about a black assailant at a traffic light.
Susan Smith is in a real fight for her life.
You'll be going to the gym.
I think that right now, unless something dramatic happens, Susan Smith will be the first woman sentenced to the electric chair in this state in the last 40 years.
Susan Smith was sentenced to life in prison, with the jury choosing not to impose the death penalty and allowing for the possibility of parole after 30 years. David Smith divorced her before the trial and, with the help of his family and friends, managed to rebuild his life. He later remarried and had 2 children, a son and a daughter. They know who Michael and Alex were and the tragic events that unfolded. As for Susan, the end of her 30-year sentence, which would allow her to apply for parole, is approaching quickly. Preliminary reports indicate that her first parole hearing may be scheduled for November 2024. Will she be granted her freedom? There are concerns, particularly since it had been reported that she contracted a sexually transmitted infection while in prison due to extended relationships with 2 guards and several female inmates. Throughout her time behind bars, she has led a rather tumultuous life, which will likely be a factor during her parole evaluation.